Okay, so ready to dive in. Today we're looking at the story behind a pretty recognizable name, I think, Jawed Karim.
Mm-hmm.
And, you probably recognize him as the co-founder who uploaded the first ever YouTube video.
Me at the zoo.
Yeah, exactly. Me at the zoo. And so we've gone through and compiled a lot of information about him, about his background, about how integral he was to YouTube's early days.
Right.
And then kind of what he's been up to since then, and even some of his thoughts and opinions on how the platform has evolved. So it's going to be really interesting to kind of trace his journey and see what we can learn.
Yeah, it's really fascinating. We've got a ton of details about his life story, like his entire biography, the nitty-gritty of his work with YouTube early on, and then what he's been doing since.
Yeah.
Really kind of going beyond just like the tech success.
Right.
A little deeper into the individual.
Exactly, yeah.
And kind of the thought process.
So let's start at the beginning and just see, what shaped him. He was born in October of 1979.
Right.
And it's interesting because he wasn't born here in the U.S. He was actually born in East Germany.
Oh, wow.
In a place called Merseburg, which at the time was part of Bezirk-Halle.
Okay.
And what's immediately fascinating is his family background. I mean, his father was from Bangladesh, and he was a researcher at 3M.
Wow.
And his mother was German, and she was a biochemistry scientist at the University of Minnesota.
That's interesting.
So right from the beginning, you have this really diverse background. And I wonder how much of an impact, do you think that had on him later on?
Yeah, I mean, you can just imagine growing up in that kind of family, international, like, strong professional backgrounds.
Right.
Probably gave him a different perspective, a broader worldview.
Yeah.
Maybe an analytical way of approaching problems.
Sure.
He's also multilingual, right? He speaks German natively and English and Bengali.
Oh, wow.
So again, that exposure to different cultures and ways of thinking, that's got to shape you.
Yeah, absolutely. So his early life in East Germany wasn't all, roses and sunshine. From what we found, the information suggests that they actually crossed the inner German border in the early 1980s because of racism that they were experiencing. Oh, yeah. And then they moved to Neuss in West Germany, and even there, the racism apparently continued, and eventually the family moved to St. Paul, Minnesota, here in the U.S. in 1992.
Wow. So he had moved around a lot.
Yeah. And think about that, as a kid especially, I mean, how much upheaval and adaptation, to be, a young teenager and already have lived in 3 different countries.
Right. And experience that kind of...
Societal challenge, exactly. And he graduated from St. Paul Central High School in 1997 and kind of, laid the groundwork for his academic pursuits later on.
Okay. So how did he end up getting involved in computers and tech?
Well, that's a really interesting story. He attended the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign. And actually, initially, he didn't graduate. And that's something that we see a lot with tech entrepreneurs. They kind of...
Yeah, they go off and do their own thing.
Yeah, they get an idea. They're like, I'm not going to wait for this piece of paper.
Right.
And, but this isn't the end of his education. But this is where things get really interesting. Okay. So he got an internship at Silicon Graphics Incorporated, or SGI. Uh-huh. And for those of you who remember... back in the 90s, SGI was a huge deal.
Oh, yeah.
In computer graphics, they were known for their really powerful workstations that were used in all kinds of things, from like film special effects to scientific visualizations, all this crazy stuff.
It's amazing how things have changed so quickly.
Yeah, well, it's amazing the foundation that they laid. And he was actually involved in some pretty cutting-edge work there. He did 3D voxel data management.
Oh.
Which is a really complicated way of representing 3D objects in computers.
Okay.
And he even contributed to the Visible Human project.
I've heard of that.
It's wild. And this was just an internship.
Yeah. That's pretty intense for an internship.
It really is. It shows how much he was already interested in these complex technical challenges.
Yeah.
But then here comes a real turning point in the YouTube story.
Okay.
He became an early employee at PayPal.
Oh, wow.
And not just any employee. He was designing core components of their system, including their real-time anti-fraud system, which is like...
It's essential.
Yeah, essential to an online payment platform like that.
For sure.
And of course, this is where he met the other 2 YouTube co-founders, Steve Chen and Chad Hurley.
Right.
So it's just wild how all these different roles and experiences just converge to create this thing that ends up becoming revolutionary.
I mean, it really shows you how innovation happens.
Yeah.
It's not just one thing. It's like all these different skills and experiences and then people coming together and that spark.
Yeah.
And the relationships they made at PayPal.
Yeah.
Obviously, there was a lot of trust and shared vision there because they ended up going on to do YouTube together.
Yeah. Right. And, it's important to note that even during this time, he did eventually go back and earn his bachelor's degree in computer science.
Oh, okay.
And then later a master's degree in computer science from Stanford.
Wow. So he's got the academic chops, too.
Yeah, he did it all. So you've got the stage set now, and 2005 rolls around, and YouTube is co-founded by Karim Chen and Hurley. And then, of course, the moment that everybody knows is the upload of that first video, Me at the Zoo, April 23rd, 2005.
Yeah.
As of just March of this year, it has over 351 million views, which is just mind-boggling to think about something so simple.
Yeah, it's crazy to think about how this global phenomenon started with just a quick video at the zoo.
And he was really hands-on with the initial concept and the development of the website itself.
So he was actually coding and building?
Oh, yeah. He wasn't just the idea guy. He was in the trenches.
Wow.
But there's a twist to the story here because as YouTube starts taking off, Karim decides to do something a little unexpected. He actually enrolls as a graduate student at Stanford.
Wait, so he's starting this huge company, but also going to grad school?
Yeah, essentially. And he kind of stepped back from YouTube's day-to-day operations and took more of an advisory role.
Huh. That's not the typical startup founder story.
No, not at all. And it probably had a lot to do with his equity stake in the company because he agreed to not be a full-time employee.
So he probably didn't get as much of the pie as the other two.
Exactly. He took a much smaller share than Hurley and Chen.
Interesting.
And that's probably why he was relatively unknown as the third founder until that huge news of the Google acquisition in 2006.
So he was kind of under the radar.
Yeah, very much so, which is so different from how we usually think of startup co-founders.
Definitely. But Google buying YouTube, that's got to be a big payout, even with a smaller stake, right?
Oh, yeah, for sure. When Google acquired YouTube, even though he had that smaller stake, he still ended up with 137,443 shares of Google's stock.
Wow.
And at the time, based on the closing price of the stock, that was worth something like $64 million.
That's still a life-changing amount of money.
Absolutely. So while he wasn't as visible, he certainly contributed and it was recognized.
Maybe that distance gave him a different perspective on how YouTube was developing,
It's a good point. It's something to think about. And he didn't just disappear from the tech world after that.
What did he do?
Well, in March of 2008, he launched his own venture fund called University Ventures.
Okay.
Which is now known as Y Ventures, and he had some big names partnering with him.
So he was still very much in the game of innovation.
Oh, yeah, and not just creating new platforms. He was also really good at spotting promising ventures early on.
Like?
Well, most notably, Y Ventures was an early investor in Airbnb. They participated in the initial seed round back in April of 2009.
Wow, that's a pretty good one to get in on the ground floor.
Yeah, talk about a success story to be a part of. And Y Ventures has invested in other companies you've probably heard of too, like Palantir, Reddit, and Eventbrite.
So he's got a good track record.
Yeah, he's been a pretty active player in the tech investment world, even if he's not always in the spotlight.
It's funny, though, for a guy who created this huge video platform, he seems to like staying out of the limelight.
It's true, but here's where things get really interesting for our story. He's continued to engage with YouTube itself even after stepping back.
Oh, so?
He's used the description of his very first video, Me at the Zoo, to comment on some of YouTube's big decisions over the years.
Oh, that's kind of clever, actually. Yeah.
Yeah, it's like this living, breathing commentary on the platform's history and its direction.
I like it.
So, for example, back in 2013, YouTube decided to require Google Plus accounts for commenting.
Oh, yeah. I remember that there was a ton of backlash.
Huge backlash. And Karim, he didn't hold back at all.
What did he say?
He updated the video description and just straight up asked, why on earth you need a Google Plus account to comment on YouTube?
He just came right out and said it.
He did. And he even mentioned that he couldn't comment himself anymore because he didn't want a Google Plus account.
Wow.
So it shows how much he cares about the user experience, and he's not afraid to speak up when he thinks something is wrong.
And Google eventually got rid of that requirement, right?
They did, and then the whole platform eventually went away.
Yeah, that's one of the big challenges, isn't it? Trying to evolve without alienating your core users.
It's a tough balance for sure. And then fast forward to November 2021, and Karim uses that same video description to address another big YouTube decision, the removal of dislike counts.
Oh, yeah, I remember that.
His initial update was pretty blunt, basically saying that if the whole YouTube creator community thinks it's a bad idea, it's probably a bad idea.
Ouch.
Yeah, and then he added a longer critique later, suggesting it could lead to a decline of the platform.
It's a pretty strong statement from one of the original creators.
It is, and it highlights this fundamental difference of opinion about what a healthy, transparent platform looks like.
Right, for both creators and viewers.
Exactly. Removing dislikes was super controversial in the YouTube world, and his public criticism really added fuel to the fire.
It makes you wonder how much weight a founder's opinion should carry.
Yeah, especially when it's going against what the current users and the business want. It's a tough one. And then just this past February, in 2025, he updated it again this time to talk about microplastics and how they could be affecting our brains.
Wow. So he's really using that platform to speak out on broader issues, too.
He is. It's not just about YouTube anymore. It's become this space for him to raise awareness about things he cares about.
So from a video at the zoo to a platform for social commentary, it is quite a journey.
It really is. And beyond his online commentary, he's also gotten recognition in the academic world.
Oh, how so?
He gave a lecture on the history of YouTube at the University of Illinois ACM conference back in 2006.
Interesting.
Kind of giving that insider's perspective on how it grew so fast.
That's cool.
And then in May 2008, he went back to his alma mater and was the commencement speaker.
Wow.
Which actually made him the youngest commencement speaker in the school's history up to that point.
So from leaving university early to being the youngest commencement speaker.
That's quite a path, right?
It really is.
And it speaks volumes about the impact he's had. So when you look at his whole story, it's a great reminder that innovation can come from the most unexpected places. I mean, from his early life where he was exposed to all these different cultures, which probably made him more adaptable and open to new ideas.
Yeah.
To the role he played in building this platform that's changed how we share information globally, and then to his continued engagement with YouTube, even when it's to criticize them.
Yeah, it's almost like he can't let it go.
He's still invested in a way.
For sure.
And it's a good reminder that behind all these big tech companies and platforms are people with their own stories and motivations.
Yeah, we tend to forget that.
Yeah, we just think of them as these big faceless entities, but they all started somewhere.
An idea.
Yeah. And it's interesting to think about how their original intentions maybe line up with or don't line up with what these things become.
Right, like the road to hell is paved with good intentions.
Yeah. And, hearing how outspoken Karim has been lately, especially about the dislike button and now talking about microplastics and everything. What are your thoughts on the big challenges facing these online platforms today? And what role do you think the original creators should play in shaping their future?
Well, that's a great question to leave everyone with. I'd love to hear what our listeners think.
Yeah, definitely let us know your thoughts. And thanks for joining us on this deep dive.
It was a fascinating one.
It really was. Until next time.
See ya.
Bye.